Good day to all Malaysians. This is Michael Khan speaking on behalf of MyKita and 3A Global comprises of Asian Alliance for Advancement Malaysia and Advanced Accreditation Authority of Singapore. My last sharing and announcement on 23rd of March 2020, which is a week ago, on MCO What's Next, has been quite accurate, with the MCO extension eventually announced by the Prime Minister, His Honourable Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin 2 days later. Today, I'm going to share the hope from the SME sector as a furtherance of the 250 ringgit billion Prihatin Economic Stimulus Package. This sharing will be known as SPEG, S-P-E-G, or Stimulus Package for Engines of Growth, with 25 specific stimulus points. The recent announcement of the 250 billion ringgit stimulus package on the 27th of March 2020, 2 days ago, is understandably a direct injection of liquidity into the economy to create more economic activities. Now, this sounds simple, but an effective and valid approach, which is to create demand and, if possible, a demand that surpasses supply. What I like about the injection of cash directly to the targeted grassroots, other concerns or other worries aside, is the segment who will really spend the money and not thinking about saving them, simply because these are the people who already don't have enough to spend. We have to look beyond politics and beyond simple economics. In times of crisis like this, especially when the country's coffer is already at an uncomfortable level due to the ugly past, to sustain the economics and the country's ongoing and continuity, we need to resort to non-cash economic maneuvers. Financial aid to the people and to the businesses are two totally different sets of approaches: monetary for the people and fiscal for the businesses. Now, the reason I know this is because I have seen, and trust me, I've seen the ugly side of businesses and how financial aids are being exploited in my 20 years of experience in business consulting, sitting in grant approval committees and suggesting strategic plans for scientific and technological assistance at all levels. Imagine this. I mean, with due respect to the business community like me, what would we do if businesses receive financial aid? Now, the first thing that naturally comes into mind is to maintain the ROI, or return on investment, and shareholders' PE ratio, or the price earning ratio. In simple terms, it means when businesses receive the money, the first thing that they want to do is to protect the profit first. Don't get me wrong, this is not a bad thing, because businesses have to take a prudent and conservative approach to ensure business continuity, because they have tens, if not hundreds or thousands of families to feed. They have so many rice bowls to take care of. What would actually come last to mind is increase the staff salary. Sounds blunt, but it's a reality. Now that the 250 billion ringgit stimulus package has been announced, which is not without many other concerns, such as the sources of income, or will the money reach the targeted recipients, etc. And one key concern is that the 2020 budget, and let us not forget this, the 2020 budget announced on 11 October 2019 last year totaled at 297 billion, or 18.4% of the national gross domestic product GDP. Now, don't forget, of which our GDP now is expected to shrink because of COVID-19, and out of which, during then, 81.1% or 241 billion is for operating expenditure, while the balance of 56 billion is for development expenditure. Now, the new stimulus package, 250 billion budget, is obviously sourced from non-monetary sources and perhaps dipping into the country reserves. Now, the country reserves stood at 103.7 billion USD as at 15 January 2020, or with the exchange rate of 4.33 US dollar as of yesterday, 28 March 2020, it is about 449 billion ringgit. Now, how much can we dip into that? That is a dangerous move. Consider the honey pot being dipped to at least 25 to 50 billion. We will now have to prepare for a weaker currency if this weakening is not supported by a more aggressive economy. That is why the stimulus package for SME is something that we cannot miss and something that we must have. This is where another more important priority has to be given utmost attention in the next lap of economic stimulation, which is what I call the stimulus package for engines of growth, SPEG, SPEG. Now, every country generally has 5 engines of growth: finance, agriculture, mining and construction, retail and services, and manufacturing. Now, let's talk about SME category that cut across these 5 engines of growth. A quick data. SME comprises of 98.5. Now listen carefully, it is 98.5 of total businesses in Malaysia, and is a significant portion contributing to 38.3% of the national GDP in 2018. Forget about 2019 data because data for a year is usually released in the following year's quarter 3. Now SME is also the larger employer, targeted to contribute up to 65% of the employment of the GDP's market in 2020. Now, let's put these facts aside. I suppose it is enough to highlight how important SME is, and if SME is sidelined, then the repercussions on the country's economy and even the future, I guarantee you, will be terrible. As mentioned earlier, the stimulus for SME sector is a different approach. That is providing a dynamic fiscal policy not only to keep SMEs afloat, but also to prepare them to lead beyond traditional business. But this doesn't mean that cash aid is not applicable, but we have to have a good balance between both. COVID-19 is in a way also a blessing, because it forces the traditional businesses to jump into uncharted waters by adopting new era of doing business, such as work from home, embracing new level of e-platforms, and scientific and technological adoption. Hence, this is where fiscal policy should be targeted at, to bring SME to the new era of doing business, in addition to keep them afloat for the next 3 to 6 months. Now I'm going to split my SPEG sharing into 2 broad segments. One is the cost of business, the other is the value of business. Now let me begin in the segment of cost of business, and let me begin with the most basic of doing business, which is to keep costs down. If we break down the cost of doing business, it will cover fixed and variable costs. Simple. Variable costs are something that has direct correlation to the business turnover. More business equal more variable costs, and vice versa. If the variable cost over turnover ratio becomes unhealthy, now that's the control and management to be blamed. So let's leave this portion to the business owner and leave it aside first. Let's talk about something fixed, something consistent, and therefore something that we can manage. Let's tackle the fixed costs. Something that can become a liability, especially for businesses that are poorly managed. But don't forget, these are key components in the economy. Some of the fixed costs that can kill a company within a short time, and what the fiscal policy can help, includes the following. Now, some businesses and business owners love to hoard properties, like to buy and keep in expectation for it to appreciate. Now, properties that are unproductive and worst without or ignore good marketing initiatives are these are the segment that we should not, put in a blunt word, we should not help. In such cases, I will consider the current COVID-19 as a crisis corrector in return to the balance of positive economics. Now, putting it bluntly, let the crisis corrector take its natural course by letting such businesses go bust and the properties back into the banking sector's hand. NPL will rise, the non-performing loans will rise. But don't forget, the asset value will rise even further, given the financial sector a plus point. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about the micro. I'm talking about the macro economy, because do not forget, the financial sector is one main engine of growth of a country.